The Dragon's Chosen One. Chapter 3. Elara rested her back against a smooth, moss-covered boulder near the edge of the glade, her fingers trailing absently through the cool grass. The night sky stretched above, like a tapestry of shimmering stars, each one reflected in the mirror-like surface of the nearby stream. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth, soothing her senses after the tumultuous days behind them. She could still feel the echoes of danger pulsing in her chest, but for now, she savored this rare moment of calm. The hidden mountain refuge was an oasis of serenity, and if not for the bruises and scrapes lining her skin, she might have believed all their troubles had been a dream. Kael approached with slow, measured steps, carrying a small basket of supplies he had salvaged from their hurried escape. His gaze shifted between Elara and the cluster of trees marking the glade's perimeter, as though half expecting an unknown threat to emerge. Heroine was perched at a respectful distance, watchful eyes scanning the night. The dragon rumbled softly, an assurance that he stood guard. Elara smiled faintly, the sound reminding her how fortunate they were to have found a sanctuary, known only to dragons. "You should rest," Kael murmured, setting the basket down by her feet. "We've traveled so far, and you're still injured." Elara flexed her sore arm. The cut on her shoulder throbbed, but it was the dull ache in her ribs that bothered her most. "I'll be fine," she replied, though her voice wavered slightly. Kael knelt beside her, the soft light of the campfire illuminating strands of dark hair that fell across his forehead. He examined her face with gentle concern. "Let me see," he said, referring to the bandage that peeked out beneath her tunic. Reluctantly, she leaned forward, allowing him to unfasten the makeshift dressing. The cool night air brushed her skin, and she hissed quietly as he lifted the cloth. His features tightened in sympathy at the sight of the bruise, spreading across her ribs. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, voice low. She forced a wry smile. "You say that as though we had a choice. If we hadn't pushed, we might never have escaped." He touched the bruise with delicate fingers, applying a mild salve. She winced, but the pain soon faded into a warm numbness. "It will heal," he promised, "if you let it." Elara glanced around the glade, the moonlit stream, the hushed rustle of leaves, the faint glow of their campfire. For the first time in many days, they were alone. No suspicious onlookers, no dire warnings about prophecies. Just the two of them and Zephyrin's reassuring presence. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "I still can't believe we found this place. It's like a dream." Kael nodded, carefully recovering her wound. "Zephyrin guided us here. He must have known we needed somewhere secret, somewhere safe. Dragons rarely share these sanctuaries, even with each other, so we owe him our gratitude." She smiled at the mention of her old friend. The memory of first healing Zephyron years ago filled her with warmth. "He's never steered me wrong," she said. "Even before all this prophecy nonsense, he always had a knack for finding hidden nooks." Kael's expression darkened slightly at the word prophecy. He set aside the bandages and settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We can't keep running forever," he said quietly. "But for tonight, at least, I hope you can find some peace." Elara studied his face. Fatigue etched faint lines at the corners of his eyes, and there was a tension in his brow that hadn't faded since they fled Eldoria's court. "We both deserve some peace," she said. "You're the prince who gave everything to protect dragons, only to be met with rumors and suspicion." He turned his gaze to the rippling stream. "It's strange. I always thought that once I showed the court how vital dragons are to Eldoria's future, they would listen. I never expected them to believe a prophecy saying one rider could destroy everything." "Prophecies are convenient when people need someone to blame," Elara murmured. "But you don't really think I'd bring ruin to Eldoria, do you?" Her tone was light, but beneath it lay an unspoken fear. She found herself holding her breath, waiting for his answer. He took her hand gently, threading his fingers through hers. "Elara, I have never believed you capable of such a thing. You've dedicated yourself to healing, to saving dragons. People fear what they cannot understand, and your bond with Zephyron is extraordinary. That doesn't mean it's evil. She felt her throat tighten. You sound so sure, but sometimes I doubt myself. Everything happening with Seraphina and the missing dragons, it's made me realize how fragile trust can be. Kael's eyes softened. Seraphina, he said, his voice laced with regret. I should have told you more about our history. Her father once hoped for an alliance between our kingdoms, and for a time, I thought I might marry her. But it was a political arrangement, nothing more. When my father died, that plan fell apart, and I stayed in Eldoria to focus on the dragons. Seraphina returned to Amber Haze. It's in the past, Elara. You are the only one I see now. Elara looked away, heat flooding her cheeks. She hated how jealousy had gnawed at her, yet part of her still felt threatened by the princess's poised confidence. I'm sorry, she whispered, for doubting you. Everything was so overwhelming. She seemed so sure of herself. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. She is sure of herself, but that doesn't mean my feelings are torn. Not anymore. Her gaze dropped to their joined hands. It felt both comforting and terrifying to be so open with him. Then, you never loved her? He let out a soft laugh. No. Respect, yes, but love, no. My father used to say that duty and love rarely go hand in hand, but I think he was wrong. I think we can have both, if we choose wisely. She exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. In that moment, the tension that had been coiling inside her chest began to unravel. A gentle rumble from Zephyron drew their attention. The dragon lifted his massive head from the grass and blinked at them, as if approving of their conversation. Elara laughed quietly. He's always so perceptive. Sometimes I think he understands more of our words than he lets on. I don't doubt it, Kael said, standing and offering her a hand to help her up. Why don't we move closer to the fire? You're shivering. Elara realized that her limbs were indeed cold, though she hadn't noticed before. She let him guide her to the campfire they had built earlier. The flames crackled in a soothing dance, casting shadows across the boulders. Together they laid out a soft blanket on the grass. Elara lowered herself onto it, wincing slightly at the persistent throb in her ribs. Kael sank down beside her. Rummaging in the basket for something to serve as a meal, he pulled out a small pouch of dried fruit and a water flask, handing them to her. It's not much, but it should hold us until morning. She accepted gratefully, nibbling on a piece of fruit. The sweetness reminded her how little they had eaten that day. Thank you, she murmured. For everything. He gave a dismissive shrug, though his eyes gleamed with warmth. I'd do far more for you than this, Elara. They ate in companionable silence, lulled by the crackle of flames and the gentle rustle of leaves. From time to time, Elara glanced at Kael, noticing how his armor seemed more battered than she remembered. She recalled the way he had risked his life to protect her when the robed sorcerers attacked. The image of him standing firm against a tide of dark magic was forever etched in her mind. It must be hard, she ventured finally, carrying so many expectations on your shoulders. Everyone sees you as the future of Eldoria. He let out a thoughtful sigh. It can be. My father taught me that leadership demands sacrifice. Even before I met Seraphina, there were days I felt suffocated by the palace walls. Then I discovered the dragons, their majesty and intelligence. They opened my eyes to a different world, one where humans and dragons might share true harmony. But the court never quite shared my enthusiasm. Elara reached for his hand, linking her fingers with his again. And then you met me. A faint smile curved his lips. I remember the first time I saw you caring for that hatchling. You were so protective, so fierce in your kindness. It made me think that perhaps not all humans see dragons as beasts or tools. You changed my view of what was possible. She traced the back of his hand with her thumb. I remember sensing your presence before I knew who you were. You watched me from a distance, trying to understand my connection with Zephyron. Part of me was annoyed, and part of me was intrigued. Kael chuckled. I didn't mean to spy. I just couldn't fathom how you had earned a dragon's trust so completely. It was mesmerizing. They fell silent, memories of their early encounters drifting in the space between them. The night felt endless, a cocoon of shadows and starlight that belonged entirely to them. After a moment, Elara turned her body so she could face Kael fully, eyes earnest. Sometimes, I wonder what might happen if we fail, if the prophecy is true, if someone orchestrates events to make it seem like I'm bringing ruin. Do we have the strength to stop it? Kael reached up and cupped her cheek, his palm warm against her skin. We will stand against any threat. I don't care what words were etched onto ancient parchment. You're not alone in this, Elara. Neither am I. The dragons trust us. That has to mean something. She swallowed hard, moved by his conviction. I want to believe that. I want to believe our choices can outweigh whatever destiny others think is set in stone. He leaned closer until their faces were mere inches apart. I believe in you, he whispered. In us. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. The flickering firelight danced across his features, highlighting the sincerity in his eyes. He hesitated, giving her the space to pull away if she wished. But instead, she closed that final gap, pressing her lips to his in a tentative kiss. At first it was soft, almost uncertain. Then the enormity of everything they had endured surged between them, and the kiss deepened. She felt her anxieties melting, replaced by a wave of warmth that flowed from him to her. His hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer, and she reveled in the heady sensation of surrendering to this moment of pure connection. When they finally broke apart, a hushed hush lingered. The stars overhead seemed brighter, as though they had stepped into a secret realm. Elara's cheeks burned with a mixture of shyness and euphoria. Kael's breath was uneven, and he brushed his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since we first fled the palace, he admitted, voice husky, maybe even before. Elara laughed softly, leaning into his touch. You have no idea how many times I wondered if you felt the same. He drew her onto his lap, and she rested there, head on his shoulder. The crackling flames played across their intertwined forms, bathing them in a golden glow. Zephyron stirred in the distance, but did not interrupt. The dragon understood that this was a night for confession, closeness, and renewal. They spoke in low tones, sharing dreams of a future where humans and dragons coexisted in harmony, where Eldoria's court respected the bond she and Kael shared. Elara explained her fears that the court might always resent her for being an outsider, for controlling power they refused to understand. Kael assured her that if the court would not listen to reason, he would find another way to prove her worth. I refuse to let old prejudices dictate Eldoria's future, he said firmly. If the prophecy speaks of destruction, then let us make it destruction of old ignorance, not the kingdom itself. We can build something new. Elara was struck by the passion in his voice. You speak as though you're ready to defy your own legacy. He gazed into the distance where the mountain peaks formed a jagged silhouette. I am prepared to reshape that legacy if I must. I'm tired of living under the shadow of rules made centuries ago by people who never imagined a bond like ours. She touched his cheek, the calloused pads of her fingers running over a faint bruise. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. He turned his head, pressing a tender kiss to the inside of her wrist. The simple gesture sent a shiver through her. She let herself sink deeper into the moment, releasing tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. What if I'm not strong enough to protect you? She whispered. I know how to fight. But these sorcerers, these powers, they're beyond anything I've faced before. Kael's arms tightened around her. You underestimate yourself. I've seen you stand your ground against foes who would break lesser warriors. You have a courage that humbles me, Elara. She blinked, touched by his words. I only do what must be done. And that is true strength, he said simply. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, content to let the crackle of flames and the distant call of night birds fill the space. The glade's beauty was unparalleled. Silver moonlight glinting off the stream, wild flowers nodding in the breeze, and the faint glow of fireflies dancing among the reeds. Elara inhaled, cherishing the scent of damp earth and the soft perfume of blossoms. The warmth of Kael's presence and the rhythmic thud of his heartbeat against her ear enveloped her like a protective shield. She felt safe, cherished in a way she had never experienced. Yet a small voice inside reminded her that this sanctuary was temporary. Morning would bring the return of responsibilities and dangers. Kael, she said quietly, lifting her head to look into his eyes. Promise me something. Whatever happens next, wherever we're forced to go, don't keep secrets from me. Don't spare me from the truth, even if it's difficult. His gaze flickered with an unspoken resolve. I promise, but you have to do the same for me. I can't protect you if I don't know what's in your heart. She nodded, recalling the jealousy that had simmered within her whenever Seraphina spoke to him. I will, she said, voice trembling with emotion. No more secrets. He kissed her again, softer this time, filled with a tender reassurance. When their lips parted, she noticed the faint glimmer of unshed tears in his eyes. In that moment, she realized how deeply the burden of leadership weighed on him, how he too was afraid of failing. It made her love him all the more. They pulled the blanket around themselves as the night air grew colder, finding solace in each other's warmth. Elara could feel the dull ache in her ribs, reminding her that she was not yet healed. But for once, the pain seemed distant. Emotional wounds were healing here, in this place of hidden magic and quiet acceptance. Hours drifted by in murmured conversation. Kael confided tales of his youth, of lonely mornings wandering the palace corridors, haunted by his father's expectations. He spoke of finding Seraphina as a young dragon, half wild and suspicious, and how earning her trust felt like the first genuine victory he'd ever achieved. Elara, in turn, spoke of her early years of loneliness, of her unbreakable bond with Zephyron, formed out of mutual need and compassion. They laughed over old fears and traded confessions about fleeting hopes. At times, one of them would turn shy, the vulnerability nearly overwhelming. But the glade's serenity and the unyielding presence of the dragon they both loved emboldened them to keep speaking. At some point, exhaustion weighed down their eyelids. Elara curled against Kael's side, lulled by the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The fire crackled lower, its embers glowing like distant rubies. Zephyron, assured they were safe, lowered his head and drifted into a light doze, his large form blending with the shadows. Elara felt her thoughts drifting, buoyed by a sense of profound calm. She tilted her head to the stars overhead, silently marveling at how they twinkled as though celebrating her newfound closeness with Kael. She had never allowed herself to fully trust in destiny before, but tonight, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, their bond was meant to shine brighter than any foretelling of doom. Her voice came out hushed, half lost in the cricket song. Kael, do you think there's truly a future where dragons and humans live as equals, where no one has to fear or exploit the other? He took a moment to answer, pondering her question under the canopy of night. I believe in the possibility. We might not see it tomorrow, or the next day. It could take years of struggle. But I've seen enough to know that if good people stand together, everything can change. She gave a faint laugh. You sound like you're auditioning for the role of a noble king. He chuckled, the vibrations resonating against her cheek. I'd rather be a prince who follows his heart. And right now, my heart says we have a chance to remake the world, or at least a corner of it. If that means facing down an ancient prophecy, so be it. She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. The tension in her body melted away, replaced by a gentle hope that she clung to as if it were a lifeline. Before long, she drifted into a shallow sleep, lulled by the sense of security she'd thought lost in the chaos of the past weeks. When she stirred again, the moon was low on the horizon, and a soft glow hinted at the coming dawn. Kael was still beside her, eyes half-lidded. He looked up as she shifted, brushing her hair back from her face. "Morning is near," he said quietly, voice rough with lingering fatigue. "Does that mean we leave soon?" she asked, a pang of reluctance striking her heart. "I suppose we can't hide forever," he murmured, "but let's cling to this moment a bit longer." They stayed there, wrapped in the thinning blanket, listening to the stream gurgling softly and the distant calls of night creatures returning to their dens. Zephyron awoke as well, stretching his wings in a majestic arc before folding them neatly at his sides. The dragon's large eyes watched them, a steady reminder of the bond that tied their fates together. Kael leaned in, pressing one more gentle kiss to Elara's forehead. She felt a rush of gratitude for him, for Zephyron, for this improbable sanctuary. No matter what the prophecy threatened, no matter what Seraphina or anyone else tried to stir between them, she believed in the strength of what they shared. "Elara," Kael said, voice soft, "when we head back into the world, things will get complicated again. The court might question us. The sorcerers, or whoever else hunts dragons, won't give up easily. But I want you to know, my feelings won't change." She tightened her hand in his. "Nor will mine. I am with you, Kael, wherever this path leads." His lips quirked into a wry smile. "Then let's make a promise. Right here. No matter the prophecy, no matter the fear or misunderstanding, we stand side by side, forging a better world for dragons and for Eldoria." She swallowed hard, tears of emotion threatening to surface. "I promise." They sealed it with another kiss, a gentle brush of lips that spoke of trust and unity. In that quiet, hidden glade, beneath a canopy of fading stars, they became something more than prince and warrior. They were partners, bound not by fear or duty alone, but by a love that offered hope in a time when the world seemed on the brink of darkness. Slowly, daybreak touched the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of blue and pink. A light mist curled over the stream, and the wildflowers trembled in the gentle morning breeze. Elara took Kael's hand and rose to her feet, grimacing slightly at the stiffness in her ribs. He steadied her without comment, their bodies moving in practiced harmony. Zephyron lumbered closer, lowering his head in a subtle invitation. Elara placed a hand on his scaly muzzle, feeling his deep exhale. "Thank you," she murmured. Whether he fully understood the words, she couldn't say. But the dragon's rumble of contentment suggested he did. Kael gathered their meager supplies, ensuring they left nothing behind but the faint imprint of their footprints in the grass. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, Elara glanced back at the glade, committing every detail to memory. The shimmering stream, the ring of protective stones, the spot where their campfire still smoldered in soft embers. She turned to Kael, heart lighter than it had been in a long while. "I'm ready," she said, even as a swirl of anticipation and concern coursed through her veins. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then let's face what comes next. Together." Elara felt the warmth of his grip and allowed herself one last look at the hidden glade. She inhaled deeply, capturing the scent of wildflowers and the crisp mountain air, tucking it away like a treasured keepsake. With a grateful heart and renewed determination, she stepped forward. They walked into the soft morning light, a united front against the unknown trials looming on the horizon. Despite the lingering sting of injuries and the weight of uncertain destinies, a quiet optimism flowed between them. They had found something rare and unbreakable in that sanctuary beneath the stars, something strong enough to challenge old prophecies and ancient fears. The next chapter of their journey would not be easy. Old grudges and ominous forces still lurked beyond the mountain pass. But for now, in that gentle dawn, they held tight to each other and to the possibility of a future shaped by love rather than doom. They left the glade behind, hearts intertwined, ready to forge ahead with renewed resolve. And in the golden wash of the rising sun, the echo of their whispered promises lingered, a quiet affirmation that together they could endure whatever fate demanded.